Hello. Welcome. This is Erin Chandler, and I am the editor and founder of Rabbit House Press. And we are having our very first Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, wherever it ends up, session spotlighting our authors for Rabbit House Press. And I would love to introduce to you our first author that we're spotlighting. And this is Kevin Lane Dearinger, who wrote our recently published Bad Sex in Kentucky. Hello, Kevin.
Hey, Erin. Nice to see you.
Good to see you too.
Good Zoom visit here.
Yes, it's a good Zoom visit, and we will be in the future maybe doing interviews in person and around, but right now this is a lovely way to see the inside of somebody's house and where they're writing and living from.
Can I suggest that before you talk about me, you talk about Rabbit House Press? And let's just a reminder of who you are and what you are, because
Yes.
I found you. So.
Yes, you did find us. We are an independent publishing company based out of Versailles, Kentucky. And we publish works from a variety of different artists. We publish memoir and fiction and poetry. And we have a lot of things coming out. We're a fairly new company, but we have about 8 books now in our library and counting every month. And we like to publish unique American stories. And I've written a memoir myself. I'm the author of Junebug versus Hurricane. And I will show you Junebug versus Hurricane. This is my memoir, Junebug versus Hurricane. I also have a book of essays called Cinderella Sweeping Up. And I don't know why I brought that up, except for hopefully y'all can go buy it.
I'm glad you did.
And I'm glad I did. But I teach memoir as well. I'm a teacher. And I think that one of the most important things, I think every story is important, and memoir is such a beautiful venue to get our stories out. And I am thrilled when I found Kevin and his book, or he found us at Rabbit House Press. By the way, you can get Rabbit House Press books at rabbithousepress.com or Amazon or Ingram Publishers or your local bookstore if they're still open. Black Swan Books here carries them, and Joseph Beth locally. We're in Kentucky, as I said. So yes, we are very passionate about stories that might not get told otherwise, stories that that we think should be told, because the American fabric is so diverse and so interesting. And whether it's a dramatic story of surviving a cult, or whether it's just a sort of everyman story in the middle of growing up in a small town in Oklahoma, I think that everyone's life story, or even if it's just a section of life, even if it's a month of your life, is told in a creative literary way, is one of the most fascinating art forms that there is. And moving to Kevin's memoir, being a theater person as I am and was, finding that Kevin spent 40 years, which we'll talk to him, as a Broadway and off-Broadway actor, traveling showman. When I got his manuscript, and it was so beautifully poetic and theatrical, and hit so many chords with me, I was just absolutely thrilled that he let us publish it. So with that, I would love to hear from you, Kevin. And to start, if you could just tell us a little bit about this recently published Bad Sex in Kentucky. People always want to know, is it about sex?
It is about sex, but it isn't about anatomical awkwardness between the sheets. It is, it's not that kind of bad sex. It is about the guilt that I grew up hearing. Anything associated with intimacy as I was growing up seemed to be associated with some kind of sin or guilt, which I found very confusing, because I'm a great romantic at heart, and I believe in what comes from here. the things I was hearing about sex were upsetting to me. I grew up in a strange mixture of Catholicism and Southern Baptist, and each of those brings an odd perspective to intimacy. And trying to negotiate through that and what I was hearing and comparing that to what I was seeing, which was a very loving family. And I write about that quite a bit in the book. It is a memoir. And I try to write truthfully about it. And it's something that has stayed with me and in many ways shaped my life, because I also eventually realized that I was also a gay man. And that put a whole other layer of cultural guilt on me. I've had to sort of punch my way through that.
You didn't grow up in Los Angeles in 2020.
No, I grew up in small town Kentucky in the 50s, 60s, and 70s.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. I was at an art gallery this afternoon, socially distanced, and I ran into a lady who had just read the book, a lady I did not know. And she is from Versailles. She's from our hometown. And she read the book and she seemed to have enjoyed it. She said, "I'm from Versailles." I said, "I'm sorry." She said, "I read your book." I said, "I'm sorry." And she said that she had enjoyed it quite a bit, only it really wasn't enjoyment that she was talking about. And in our conversation, and she was very kind, she said, "Well, I really apologize." And I said, "For what?" And she said, "Well, for whatever you endured growing up in Versailles." And I told her, I said, "Well, it's not your fault." I said, it's, and we chatted for a moment about whose fault it might be. And I said, really, if the blame belongs anywhere, it belongs to time.
It's very interesting, because people would say after Junebug versus Hurricane, people would say, "I read your book," and they're like, "I'm so sorry." And I'm like, "Why?" Because, you write it and it becomes just paragraphs and sentences and creating all this, but they're like, "You went through so much." And it's probably, sometimes it's more painful for the reader. And there are moments in Bad Sex in Kentucky that are very painful to read, and you're very raw in telling the story and very open. But I understand it's like, it is cathartic. I suppose it was cathartic to write it for you.
Well, I don't know that it was a catharsis particularly, but it was a necessary piece. I had to write it. I've written other books, theater history, academic work mostly, and I needed to write this. This has been a long time coming. I've kept a journal. I'm 68 and a half years old. I've been keeping a journal since I was 12. I've never missed a day. So a lot of what I wrote, I went back and verified in the journal. I read a review of another memoir a couple of weeks ago in the New York Review of Books, and it quoted someone as saying that our memory, every time we retell a story, we end up lying somehow or another. We reinvent the story pretty much as we need to.
Mold it as their own. Joan Didion says something, paraphrasing, to the effect of, "The moment belongs to whoever takes it, swallows it, and renders it and molds it into their own." And that's what we do with memoir. It's like, you can have the same memory, but I've just taken that down. And it does become a form of, it's almost fictionalized, because you've taken that moment in every.
Well, I realize that my book is from my perspective.
Right.
And I had to sort of school myself on that a few times, because I ran it by various family members before we published it. And occasionally they would, not much, by the way, my brother and sister were very supportive, but there were a few things they said, "Well, that's not exactly how it happened." And I went back and looked in my journal. And in fact, the interesting thing for me, going back to the journal, was discovering that when I was writing it down, when it was actually happening, it was actually much worse. My memory had actually.
Oh, yes. And I felt the same way too. At points I was like, this is just the tip of the iceberg. And these are moments that I'm sure that if you had, that's what's so beautiful about memoir. It's not just beginning to end. This happened and then this happened. It's just, these are what would pop up in your memory, and things that probably, I assume, had to get out of your body and you had to get them down and on paper. These are the moments you had to share.
I'd
Will
been
you-
mulling them over a long
for a
time.
long time. Will you share some with us now, please?
I'll read a little bit from the introduction to Bad Sex in Kentucky,
Okay.
just right from the beginning.
Yes. Let me put it on.
I was born and raised in Kentucky. I got out when I could. I visited when I could stand it. And when I couldn't stand being away another day, I moved back. I have some family in Kentucky. I have deep roots in Kentucky. I also have a burial plot in a tasteful area of a tasteful historic cemetery, a floral death garden celebrating several centuries of marble vaulted gilt and gilded glory. Growing up amid the lace-trimmed graces of the bluegrass was to be suffused with visual beauty and cultural richness. It was Eden, but it was Eden after the fall, haunted always by some notion of original sin, sex, parenthetic, but ever present. Like most of our nation of hedonistic Puritans, the Kentucky in which I came of age could seem terrified by the entire business of genital contact, the whole unsayable drive to connect, in theory, in custom, and in horizontal practice. Just the hint of such matters, sexual matters, that key word with its three lingering syllables, sexual, quickly compressed in a blushing Kentucky blur, sexual, was enough to produce fluster, bluster, shame and blame, followed by cloudy chaos and a frozen-faced laugh, or a dirty snort, or, and this most often, just a hollow silence. Apprehension without comprehension. Omni animal postcoitum triista est. After sex, every animal is sad. That which is done but not discussed, enjoyed but not encouraged, denied, demanded, fulfilled, then again denied, only to be pursued with renewed determination and unassuaged fear, and always judgment, capitalized, emphatic with exclamation, italicized by squirming guilt, the sins of the flesh, always the sins of the flesh. This is the Kentucky where I grew up. White plank fences, thoroughbred horses, beauty unutterable, and privilege for the few unspeakable. Green when the rest of the country goes gray and brown. The ferny musk of boxwood, African violets on kitchen windowsills, hens and chicks, pale plant and succulent on Mima's front porch. Sycamore trees stark against the winter blue sky, mistletoe hanging high in the rotting walnut tree, the kissing plant, always out of reach, always a parasite. Southern. Hulking old courthouses hoarding dusty records of birth, marriage, discord, divorce, and death, judgment more often than justice. Old churches, mostly Protestant, molded along the fierce lines of stony Calvinism, steeples lifted not in aspiration, but in admonition, a smiting hand held and lifted against its own creations, very Southern, revenge is mine, saith the Lord. The God who smiles on all this beauty and history can be an icy deity. And it gets worse, or at least more complicated. Complication being the consequence of being human in a social context. My parents, as adults, converted to Catholicism, and I was raised Catholic. I was educated for 12 years in Catholic schools by professional virgins, male and female, steadfast and stumbling. The cultural ethos of my youth, however, remained stubbornly Protestant, deep set in the legacies of the Puritans, the Baptists, the Evangelicals, and all the other cults that enjoy procreating, tout the sanctity of marriage, ballyhoo the moral superiority of heterosexuality, and preach relentlessly against those relentless sins of the flesh. I have sinned. Oh, Lordy, Lordy, I have sinned. When we were children, we would pore over my mother's photograph albums, volume after volume of stop motion joy. Cheese, say cheese. We always giggled over an especially cheesy picture, unlabeled and undated, of our Uncle Gene and Aunt Alita, standing on a boat dock in their swimming clothes, their faces obscured in a tight embrace, the woman's arms not around the man's waist, but anchored hungrily around his neck, reeling him in for a deeper kiss. The only other place we would have seen that sort of embrace would have been in Hollywood movies on Saturday night television, weepy love stories in black and white. It was the way actors kissed, smooched. Only this lip-locked picture was not made in Hollywood, but down on Harrington Lake. And surprise, the man and the woman in the picture are not my aunt and uncle after all. We called our father Daddy Jack. In his later years, I told Daddy Jack how funny we had always found that photo of Uncle Gene and his eager wife. He looked puzzled. I showed him the photograph. Oh, Kevin, he said, his southern vowels pulled longer than usual by patient amusement. That's a picture of me with your mother right after we got married. Hearing of my ignorance, Mother hastened to label the old snapshot, Annie and Jack. She used ink, her handwriting slanting sharply, firm and definite. Annie and Jack. She gave herself first billing, but the and said it all. Passion brushed bright with pride. Pride, however, was that commodity that cometh before the fall. As I came of age in the Commonwealth of Kentucky, what I saw and heard, and consequently surmised on the subject of sex, accumulated in limestone layers of guilt. Sex has always been a messy topic. Ask Hamlet. Ask Hamlet's mother. If you listened, you learned. Sex was bad in Kentucky. In our first house, a wood frame in Versailles, Mother and Daddy Jack slept in a front room facing Douglas Avenue. Their bedroom windows were gauzy with starched flounces of sheer curtains. Their mahogany bedroom set, French provincial, was still new, still unscratched, still being paid for in monthly installments. Their bed was a standard double, just big enough for 2 adults, and on occasion, a scared child in flight from a nightmare. Mother's pillow smelled of wood hue by Fabergé, Daddy's of soap and Colgate. On the wall above their bed was a framed print of a placid Jesus, pointing with a divine index finger to his heart, open in his chest, bleeding from wounds inflicted by jagged thorns. The Sacred Heart. The first word I associated with heart was sacred. The heart was sacred. A little at the beginning.
That is beautiful. That was beautiful. Art is sacred. So I wanted to ask you to talk a little bit about, you have a very interesting, your grandmother has an interesting relation to sex in Kentucky.
I think you mean my great-grandmother. My
Great-grandmother. You're like, my grandmother had a very uncomfortable relationship with sex. No, your great-grandmother. Tell us a little bit about her in Lexington, Kentucky, which is about 10 minutes from where we are here in Versailles.
And it is where I actually am.
Where you actually are.
Moved back to Lexington. I should be careful what I say about all of this. As they used to say in book reports when I was in elementary school, read the book and find out. But my great-grandmother, my father's grandmother, my father's mother's mother, was a madam of a house of ill repute. She was one of Belle Breezing's competitors, I suppose. She was a businesswoman. She had houses.
Belle Breezing is the famous madam in Kentucky, and in fact, that in Gone with the Wind, Madam Watley, is that what it was?
Belle Watling.
Belle Watling,
Yes, is based on
Gone
it.
with the Wind. But there was
Margaret
a
Mitchell's
street
husband went to school here. That's how that connection happened.
oh, okay.
But anyway,
Tell them about the street in Lexington. There was quite a few houses.
yes, there were several red light districts over the years. It started on Short Street and moved up around Mill, but most famously McGowan Street, which is where Belle Breezing had her house. My great grandmother spread out. She had houses in Chattanooga and and Birmingham, I think. And
She's an entrepreneur.
She was. This is something we only found out recently, and I really have to credit my older brother, who is not only a brilliant art historian, but quite a brilliant historian and genealogist. And we had hints of this early on. I don't think my father ever knew this story at all. And my mother said if he had, he would have told her. And obviously my grandmother must have grown up here knowing. I don't know how she processed that. She never talked about it, ever.
It was very interesting how it was such a conservative family, and all of the linens and the teacups and there were all your great grandmothers, and they've probably seen a lot. But I thought that was an interesting twist.
My mother, who had a shrewd eye, when she found out, and this was after my father had passed away, and a few years before mother passed away, my brother told her what he had discovered. And it's all there are all kinds of records there if you look. And my mother said, I knew something was wrong. Those photographs of her, she was a little overdressed. The clothes were too nice.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, are you going to a ball every night? Kevin, let me ask you, to switch subjects, you've published quite a few other books besides this. Can you tell us a little bit about what you've written mostly professionally?
Well, as you indicated, I was an actor, and I performed mostly in musical theater in New York, and a lot on the road in regional theater. And I did travel quite a bit, and I became fascinated with old theaters. I love an old theater. I'll go up and sit in the top balcony and look down, and dreams happen. They're very magical places for me. And I also am a Shakespeare man. I read my Shakespeare every day. I've never performed it. Wasn't good enough.
You read Shakespeare every day?
Absolutely every day. I do about 20 to 30 minutes of Shakespeare every morning.
Wow, that's
a good deal of it aloud. Oh, I always have. I mean, that's been going on a long time. My Riverside Shakespeare is so annotated that it weighs twice what it weighed when I bought it. It's just the weight of the ink.
Oh, my goodness.
Anyway, I have always been fascinated by old theaters, and from that, old actors and stories of old actors. And so my first book was about Shakespearean performance here in Lexington. And the first legitimate theater west of the Alleghenies opened in Lexington in 1808. And 2 years later, they did their first Shakespeare play. And I wrote that book a few years ago.
What was it? What was the first?
The book, it's called The Bard and the Bluegrass, not a title I liked very much, but there you go.
No, I mean, what was the first Shakespeare play?
They did the Scottish play with probably a man playing the Scottish lady. That's the one about the Scottish king who kills people, and it's bad luck to say the name. But the Shakespearean performers who came through here over the next 100 years, roughly from 1810 to 1910, extraordinary people, everybody but Edwin Booth. I mean, just the greats were here. And that is what my first book was about.
Interesting.
The second was about a Kentucky actress, actually born over in Nicholas County, grew up in Paris, Kentucky, and here in Lexington. And she went to New York, caused a number of great scandals, had a few famous lawsuits, won some money, and produced Oscar Wilde's first play to star herself in it. She also directed in it. And it folded in a week. The press hated Oscar Wilde in New York, and people have forgotten about it. A play called Vera or the Nihilist. Her name was Marie Prescott, and that was my second book. And the third was about probably America's most successful playwright at the turn of the last century, and that was Clyde Fitch, a wonderfully complex, brilliant gay man who lived his life so bravely that I wrote a very long book about it.
Oh, that's funny. Well, that's fascinating. So, and then you've written a lot of plays. I saw one of your plays, and you're a wonderful playwright. That one-man show. What is the name of that play?
It was called Naked on Request.
Naked on Request.
We also did a play called Regarding Mrs. Carter, which is about another Lexington actress, Mrs. Leslie Carter, who was one of the great New York actresses at the turn of the last century.
Wow.
And she was born right here in Lexington, spitting distance down the road that way. And she, another scandal lady, and writing about her, I think all my writing would qualify as it all qualifies as a labor of love, but this one certainly did. I just fell in love with Mrs. Carter, and a local actress, Julianne Pogue, played it here just brilliantly.
I love her. I love her.
And it's a play that I really would like to see done again. As I also have a couple of full-length things that I've written that need to get on the stage.
Yes. Oh goodness. Well, we'll have to talk playwriting again sometime, because this won't be the last interview, but I've been writing some plays myself. So
Coke, by the way.
What?
I just need to explain. I'm sipping Diet Coke.
Diet Coke. Oh, I know. I was like, is it red wine? I'm sipping water.
I realized it looked like that. So
yeah, it looked, yes, exactly. So, okay. So, I want to hear one more excerpt, please. And then I want to talk, just before we close, just a little bit about your experience as a traveling actor. Okay. All right.
Never ask an old actor about his experiences. He'll go on way too long.
I know. We'll go for just a few minutes, and then we have a treat for everyone that stays until the end. Okay. Thank you, Kevin. I'm going to go on to speaker view now.
Just as a little bit of setup for this excerpt from Bad Sex in Kentucky, when I was in college, I took a very heavy course load. I was working several low-paying jobs, and I was appearing on stage when anybody would let me. So I was pretty exhausted, and I didn't have much money. I was too proud to take much from my parents, and I nearly starved myself to death. And at one point, I took myself to the clinic at the university to complain about stress, and there was a doctor there, and I never saw him again. And he asked me about my personal life, and then informed me that there was no such thing as love. He said there was only sex, that we were all basically animals. And this really made me very sad, because I did believe that the heart was sacred. And so this is from my college chapter. A year later, I tried another doctor. This time it really was stress. I was plowing through 800 pages of required reading every week, banging out analytical essays on a cranky manual typewriter, and living on cheap spaghetti, powdered soup, saltine crackers, and triple-boiled tea bags, Liptons. An old family friend told me that I would be burned out, dead, before I was 25. You won't ever make old bones, she predicted. My eyes ached. My mother suggested I see her old psychiatrist, not a therapist, but a real MD, a Freudian couch, ink blots, and tranquilizers by the truckload shrink. On my first office visit, the good doctor would neither see nor speak with me. His rabbity nurse put me in a room for a 2-hour test. Choose the provided answer that most closely matches your response to a long list of questions and fill in the bubble. The questions tended to be repetitive, prodding the same theme with slightly varied phrasing, as if determined to prove me wrong or catch me in a lie. Once I saw this pattern, I finished the 2-hour test in 40 minutes. I had no problem with the questions that pussyfooted around sexuality and asked if I dreamed of, thought of, considered, fantasized, imagined, desired, craved, or beat a bongo at midnight for naked men. Hardly subtle, I thought. But not once did the form ask directly about my sexual identity. Multiple choice offers tasteful limitations. I tapped on the door and gave my completed form to the surprised nurse. But you couldn't have finished it all. I think I have, ma'am. Perhaps you misunderstood the format? No, ma'am. Skipped a page? No, ma'am. She told me to come back in 3 weeks. By then, the computer in Ohio, she said, would have processed my results. The computer in Ohio promised to understand me. 21 days later, eyes still blurry with malnutrition and exhaustion, I returned. Dr. Mein Kampf, not his real name, summoned me into his low wattage office. He held a long, primitive printout from an early days computer. I could imagine the flying punch cards and whirling reels and blinking lights that had considered my answer bubbles and spit out an evaluation of my soul. Dr. Mein Kampf, not his real name, prefaced his reading of the printout with oily reassurances that I might have misunderstood the questions or darkened the wrong bubbles. I assured him that I had, to the best of my knowledge, followed directions, read the questions carefully, and answered honestly. I was, after all, an English major who had taken Introduction to Psychology. Well, he intoned, and don't be upset, mistakes are possible, no machine is perfect, and don't be defensive, but the computer suggests that you might have just possibly had, please don't overreact, homosexual tendencies. Oh, hell. I don't have tendencies, I answered, proud to be more precise than a computer. I am a homosexual. In fact, I'm gay and I don't have a problem with it, not really. I do have trouble sleeping and my eyes are tired. Could you just give me something to help me relax and sleep, like you did for my mother? Whatever you do, he quickly replied, as if bitten by a weasel in drag. Never ever tell your mother that you are homosexual. She'd never be able to handle it. Oh, answered my soul. And here's the best advice I can give you, he continued, unasked. Now, just let me tell you a little story. I was a doctor in the war, you know, and some of the guys in the barracks came to me to complain that there were 2 fairies in their unit. They said they thought those fellas were looking at them funny in the showers. I called these 2 queers into my office and I told them that I was on to what they were. I said to them that if they just had to have those kinds of needs and urges, they should just go out into the woods and just do it to each other. Just go out into the woods. Oh. I told him that if he would write me a prescription for Valium, I would be on my way. He did. I was. He prescribed 10 milligrams of Valium 4 times a day. The next day, I took the prescribed overdose at breakfast, saltines in a saucepan of boiled tea bags, borrowed my roommate's car and started off to school. 3.5 minutes later, a policeman stopped me for driving the wrong way down a one-way street. I showed him my bottle of pills, and he read the prescription. He shook his head, paused to look into my glassy eyes, and told me to go home and sleep it off. He followed me back to my apartment door and issued no ticket. Driving the wrong way on a one-way street. The gesture had symbolic resonance for an English major. The bottle of little blue pills unused, stayed around until the night I used them all. Well, almost all. I'd seen the movies and read the books. I knew what was expected. I was 21, 2 months out of college. I was educated. I was inept. I ended up with a small scar on my right wrist. I have quite a few small scars. As I once overheard the wise wife of one of my Kentucky cousins droll to her sweet-souled husband, "Well, honey, of course you're damaged. We're all damaged." Thank you.
Well, yes, yes, we are. I have always been proud of all my scars. I don't have any suicide scars, but I've got a few surgery scars, and all of this, and it's just, going through so much in life. It's like a badge of honor, I believe, and going to the edge like that of depression, which I certainly understand, is especially when you're that age, when you're young like that. It was, it's one of the reasons I didn't have children, because getting to adulthood was very tough for me. I want to watch somebody else go through it. So anyway, I'm glad that you got through it and to the other end. How old were you then during that, at college?
I was 20.
20.
Yeah. No, I was 21, actually, when that happened. I was right out of college.
21.
Yeah. And still going to bed every night with the rosary in my hand. So, pretty.
My first nervous breakdown came at 28. So I was like, but it's tough to get through your 20s. My goodness.
I don't think I've ever had a breakdown, but I've had, that obviously was a pretty crucial and awful moment.
Yes.
And I spoke to no one about that for years. No one at the time, no one for a long
And
time.
that's what's so the beauty of memoir and the beauty of writing about these things is that the more personal that you get and the more specific you get, the more universal it becomes. And maybe, they weren't a Broadway actor, which, by the way, let's take a minute and tell us a little bit about your 40 years. Take a minute and tell us about 40 years.
Well, I moved to New York to perform. I had started doing summer stock when I was in college. I was very proud. I was getting paid when I was still in school to perform, not a lot, but I was being paid. And I joined the union, Actors Equity, and moved to New York. I got a Broadway show my first month. It folded on the road spectacularly. I've written a whole other book about that. And with no suicide attempts at all. And I should add here, my life, I've made mistakes. I've done dumb things. I am an incredibly strong human being.
Oh, I know that.
I am, and looking back, really always have been. I never believed I had much talent, but I had enough that I thought I need to see how far this will go. I was in the chorus of a Broadway show in 1976. I then toured in one of the leads in that show for a year, and then kept going back to that. I played Freddie in My Fair Lady more times than we really ought to talk about. But it paid for a lot of this house behind me here.
Oh, that's
and
wonderful.
I did a lot of regional theater. No one ever really knew what to do with me. I wasn't quite a leading man. I wasn't quite a juvenile. I wasn't a great dancer. And I was loud, and
But I'm sure you did your fair share of dancing on stage.
I leapt around with athletic grace, as one could, and had a very nice time doing it. And I took an awful lot of classes trying to get better. That was the important thing. There came a time when I actually felt that performing for me had become something rather selfish. So I taught for a good many years. I taught English at a boarding school in Connecticut and at a private boys' school in New York. And those were great years.
Did you teach theater or just English?
I taught English at the boarding school. I ran the drama program and directed a lot of plays with spectacularly talented students. At the boys' school, I only directed one musical, and it was for a particularly brilliant student. And I happened to be lucky enough to get a lot of really quite brilliant young performers around him. So I was very proud of that production, and I kind of stopped after that. But somewhere in between those jobs, I did go back out on the road. I did 2.5 years with the National Company of Secret Garden.
Oh, that's right.
Bought my house with that. That was, and retired. I did do Stephen Sondheim's 75th birthday celebration at the New Amsterdam Theater 15 years ago. And that was the last time I performed in public.
I think that that is just such a commendable thing to be able to make a living as an actor.
The nice thing is I get my pension. I received my actor's equity pension.
And you certainly did. I mean, you did something that that a lot of people, I was in LA for 25 years, 22 to 25, I don't remember. But, you know, just a few little movies here and bits on TV shows and a lot of theater that we did for free. And so, and I have, you know, so many of my friends, good friends are actors. And, but I think that to live a life and be able to support yourself as an actor, I think that's a wonderfully beautiful, lucky thing that you got to do. And now, since you are such an artiste, I would love to share towards the end of our interview. You do these wonderful songs on Facebook. And I know it's born of the pandemic and born of all this, but it's all the kind of stuff that I love. And I didn't request a certain song or anything, but if you would share with us, please, the people that will in the future get Bad Sex in Kentucky. Again, you can get it at rabbithousepress.com or Amazon or Ingram or your local bookstore. I'll repeat this again right before we sign off. But Kevin, it has been such a pleasure talking to you, and I could talk to you for another hour, but I'm trying to keep these down to a sort of manageable length. But yeah, if you would share a song with us, I would love that.
Oh, singing for me is actually fairly private, despite the fact that I have been posting these things. I sang very well for a long time. I started out as a very nasal tenor with a limited range, and then I studied for a long time and became a high tenor with pretty nice range. And then I taught for a number of years, and it kind of wrecks the vocal cords.
You don't want to sing for us.
So I will offer this, that one does not like to do in public what one used to do better. But because I'm also a good sport, I will sing this for you.
Okay, good.
This is a song my father sang, and it's total foolishness, and anybody who takes this seriously needs to never come near my book. So here. Once I went a-swimming where there were no women and no men to see. Hung my little breeches on the willow switches underneath a tree. Like the Pharaoh's daughter swam the inky waters of the river Nile. Long came a little bear and stole my underwear and left me with a smile. Should I put the dance break in? Once I went to swimming where... No, it's enough of that. Anyway.
I love it. Thank you so much, Kevin. Now, everyone go out and get this book, or actually get it from your home, Bad Sex in Kentucky by Kevin Lane Dearinger, rabbithousepress.com, Amazon, or Ingram. Thank you so much, Kevin.
Thank you. My pleasure. Thank you.
Until next time.
Thank you.
Thank you all for listening.